Welcome to Live with Anton Gunn. It is Wednesday, 2 p.m. East Coast time, 11 a.m. Pacific. To everybody in the Central Time Zone and the Mountain Time Zone, you know it's time to get in where you fit in. I'm excited about having this conversation today, particularly with anyone who is in a leadership role. If you lead a team, you want to be tuned into this conversation. If you don't lead a team, you want to be tuned into this conversation to know whether you are in a good culture or are you in a culture that is full of mistreatment and unfairness. I think it's really important that we have this conversation. Let's just unpack it real quick. So many people have quit a job in the last 2 years. I mean, I think like 80 million people have quit a job since 2021. 80 million people. People every day are finding a reason to walk away from the workplace. And I will tell you, above all else, it's not about pay. It's not about benefits. Sometimes it's about flexibility. But I will tell you what it's about more than anything else is that people are experiencing mistreatment or what I like to call injustice in their workplaces. And injustice is a term that you usually hear when it relates to like civil rights issues or some kind of high crime and misdemeanor. But I want you to understand that injustice is a daily occurrence that happens in every single workplace. That literally every single workplace has some injustice going on. You have people who get passed over for promotions, people who never get rewarded and recognized for their contributions, people who feel like they're isolated and alone at work. They don't really have any kind of diversity or connection to the workplace. I could go through many different reasons as to why injustice is happening in the workplace and examples of that injustice. As a matter of fact, I've done some research on this subject, and very soon I'm going to give all of you the opportunity to read a copy of my annual State of Workplace Injustice Report, some national research that I commissioned to understand what was going on with people in the workplace. And I would love to give you the opportunity to see some insights, but more importantly, learn what you can do to prevent it happening inside of your culture. And so today, what we're going to talk about are some red flags of mistreatment. You might think you're a good leader. You might think you're doing an awesome job. Your boss might be giving you every high five known to man because you are executing on what that boss has asked you to do. But here's my question is how are you treating your people? Are you treating them fairly? Are you treating them equitably? Are you treating them with dignity and respect? And do you know whether or not you have an unfair culture in your workplace? Do you have an unfair culture on the team that you lead? Do you have an unfair culture so much so that you are struggling as a leader to get the results that you want and you deserve? Well, today, what I wanted to spend time doing is to unpack 4 red flags that will tell you that you might be mistreating your employees, that you might be mistreating your team, and you might have a problem inside your organization and you don't even know that you have the problem. So let's jump right in. And I'm going to talk about the 4 red flags of mistreatment. This is how employees know that they're being mistreated or that you can identify that you have a culture that is full of mistreatment. Number 1, and this is the easiest one, the most visible one, and that is high turnover. And when I say high turnover, I want you to understand high turnover is the percentage of the employees that you hired in a given year that don't make it another year. Or maybe over a 3-year period. You can look at turnover annually, or maybe you can look at it over a period of time, 3 years. So what am I asking you? I'm asking you this. If you had to give me a percentage, or when I say give it to me, if you had to write down a percentage of what percentage of your employees quit in a given year, let's do some simple math. Let's say you manage 100 people. And I ask you the question, how many of those 100 employees quit within a given year? Do you know what the turnover rate ideally should be in your industry? Do you know what the global turnover rate is for your company? And more specifically, do you know the turnover rate for your division, your department, or on your team? Most people have no idea about their turnover rate. You need to assess your turnover rate. So, using that example, if you had 100 people, would you say 50% of your employees quit in a given year? 75%? 30%? 20%? Or 0%? What is the turnover rate? I'm telling you right now that your turnover rate is a sign whether you have a good culture that is treating people fairly with dignity and respect, or you have a bad culture that is mistreating people and maybe committing injustices every day. Turnover rate is everything. It's the symbol of what's right and what's wrong. So let's unpack it a little bit. Since the global pandemic of 2020, the turnover rate in most industries has generally been high. And when I say high, I'm talking plus 30%. But on average, if you look around the United States of America, most companies and organizations have about a 20% turnover rate, sometimes around 22%. I still think that it's too high. If you got 20% of your employees leaving you every year, it's going to cost you money to replace those people, to post the job and to fill the positions. So you want to try to keep your turnover rate low. Now, in some respects, having a 0% turnover rate is also a problem, because having no turnover means that everybody is comfortable and you maybe not developing them at a high level that other people see them as valuable. They're valuable to you, but nobody else thinks that they're valuable. So here's the sweet spot. A 10% turnover rate is pretty healthy. Sometimes when I say 10, let's say between 10 and 20. 13%, 15% is generally a healthy turnover rate. But a high turnover rate of 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80% means you might have a culture of mistreatment. If you think about certain industries, they have a higher turnover rate. I'll give you an example. In the food and beverage industry, people who work in restaurants and bars, that turnover rate is normally around 50%. It's generally seasonal. It's also a dime a dozen kind of job. Like if you tend bar at one restaurant, you can tend bar at 100 restaurants. If you can wait tables in one restaurant, you can wait tables in another restaurant, a dime a dozen. If you work at one fast food place, chances are you can work at another fast food place. So 50% turnover rate is generally the average. But there are some places that have an 85 or 90% turnover rate. I'm telling you, that's a culture of mistreatment. If you have a high turnover rate, you have a culture of mistreatment. But you can't know it's high until you know what the appropriate average is for your industry, what it is for your company. So if your company has an average turnover rate of 22% and your turnover rate as a leader is 40%, you got a problem. You might be mistreating your people because overall they love to stay at the company, but they love to leave your department because of how they're being treated. So you really need to unpack and understand red flag number one is a high turnover rate. And I want you to think about it. And if you want more info on this, go to antongunn.com/blog, and I talk about the 4 red flags of mistreatment there. Now, here's the second one: low engagement. So when I say low engagement, I'm talking about your employees are not highly engaged in the workplace. Now, how do you know whether your employees are highly engaged or lowly engaged? Well, the only way you're going to know that is by having an employee engagement survey. So my question for you, does your company do an annual employee engagement survey? Maybe they do it every 2 years, or maybe they haven't done it in 5 years. If you haven't done an employee engagement survey, you have no idea whether your employees are engaged or not. You probably don't even know who your employees are. But smart companies, the companies who care about their workforce, generally institute an employee engagement survey annually, every year around the same time. You put together a survey tool or hire a survey tool company. You send the survey out to all your employees, and every leader encourages them to give us feedback on our performance as leaders and as a company. We want to see how we're doing. So you basically doing an evaluation of how your company treats its people. And if you got an employee engagement survey results, it should be benchmarked against some industry average. It should be benchmarked against, other similarly sized companies. It's got to be benchmarked. Then, and only then, can you see, do you have high employee engagement or low employee engagement? Let me give you one of the telltale signs that you have low employee engagement if you do an employee engagement survey. If you send out an annual survey to all 100 of your employees and you don't have at least 70% of them respond to it, then they're not even engaged enough to complete the survey. That's a problem. That's a failure. You might have a culture of mistreatment. But if you do have 70, 75, 80% of your employees who complete the employee engagement survey, at least you're going to get a good, robust data set that could tell you more about whether your employees are actually engaged. And there will be some questions in that survey that will help you to understand why your employees are engaged and why they're disengaged, what you could be doing right, what you could be doing wrong, what you can do better to improve their engagement. But if you get this data set back and your employees are not engaged, then that means you might have a problem with mistreatment in your workplace and how you treat your people. Okay? So that's the second one, is low engagement. Number 3, the third red flag of mistreatment of your workforce is what I call a culture of fear. Now, when I say culture of fear, are your team members afraid of you as a leader? Are you an intimidator? Do you try to intimidate your team? Is there an element of fearfulness about coming to tell you bad news? Is there an element of fearfulness about coming to tell you any kind of news? See, some organizations have such a culture of fear that nobody will speak up in a meeting, that you'll end up in a meeting talking about something important, and all you're going to get is a bunch of head nods. Oh, I agree with you. Oh, I agree with you. If your team is agreeing with you 100% of the time, you may have a mistreatment problem. They may be afraid to disagree with you. They may be afraid of what the repercussions might be or what happened to the last person that disagreed with you in a meeting. Nobody wants to be treated like that in the workplace. If you're treating people like that, you got a problem. You're creating a toxic workplace culture. So understand, if people don't feel free to bring themselves to work, to speak up and share their perspective and their opinion, regardless of what role they play in the organization, if you have the mindset of shut up and dribble, that's an inside joke for some of my basketball political friends. But if your employees feel like that they can't speak up, that they need to just shut up and do their jobs, that means you might be mistreating them, because nobody should have a culture of fear in their workplace. That's never a good sign for any reason whatsoever for people to be afraid to speak up at work. You need to have an environment where people feel like it's their right and responsibility to speak up, particularly when they see stuff going wrong, when they see mistreatment, when they feel like you're doing something that might injure someone else. In healthcare, where I spent a large part of my career, we had to have this environment that even the janitorial staff needed to feel empowered to speak up when they saw physicians doing something that was not right. That everybody needed to feel like that they could speak up and say what they see, talk about what you see. But if you have employees who don't like to speak up, you never really get feedback from a particular employee group, or you don't get feedback in a meeting, it's because you might be mistreating the people that you lead. And you've created a culture of fear where people don't want to speak up. They're worried about their heads getting chopped off for any kind of reason. So check yourself to know whether you have a culture of fear. Now, the last one that I want to cover, the fourth red flag around this topic of mistreating your employees, and that is a lack of commitment. Now, when I say lack of commitment, I'm going to use a synonym that I've talked about before. The question I have, how many 859ers do you have on your team? 859ers. If you don't know what an 859er is, let me explain it to you. An 859er is that employee who is doing the bare minimum to keep their job every day. They're doing the bare minimum, meaning that they're not invested at all in helping you to succeed. They're only invested in keeping their job. So I'm going to do only as what is asked of me and required of me for the 8 hours that I'm at work. And the reason why I call them 859ers, because here's their modality mostly, is that at 8:59 is when you see them pulling into the parking lot. They're not coming 15 minutes early. They're not coming 30 minutes early. They're showing up at 8:59. Or they're logging into the Teams meeting at 8:59. Not a minute sooner, not a minute later. They're showing up at 8:59. And the whole time that they're at work, they're doing the bare minimum while they're working. They're doing their job. What you put in the job description, nothing more, nothing less. And then at 4:59, when it's the end of the day, they're heading to their car in the parking lot and they're driving away as the clock turns 5 o'clock. They're not staying a minute later. If you send an email at 4:50, they're not going to respond to it until the next day. They have absolutely no interest in at all working past 5 o'clock. They won't be committed to going above and beyond because they have been mistreated in the workplace and they're willing to just be an 859er. I would say most leaders have been an 859er or know some 859ers. Some people who don't inspire us at work, so we do the bare minimum. Well, let me go ahead and tell you, I've been an 859er. I've been that person who was going to do the bare minimum at work because I didn't respect the people who were my leaders because they didn't respect me. I didn't value them because I know they didn't value me. And most importantly, they didn't care about me, so I didn't care about them. But I was going to do the bare minimum so I didn't have to lose my job. And yes, I was in the middle of a culture of mistreatment. So I'm saying to you, you need to pay attention to these 4 red flags: high turnover rate, low engagement, a culture of fear, and a lack of commitment. These are the 4 red flags that every leader needs to be aware is going on in their workplace right now. And then once you're aware of it, that's the first step to being able to do something about it. But I want to challenge you to never to mistreat the people that you lead, that you should never look down on people. You should never create an environment where they don't want to stay. You should create an environment where they want to thrive. And so that's what I got for you today. The 4 red flags that you might be mistreating your team. I hope you watch this, share it with somebody. And if you want more context, go to antongunn.com/blog and check out my latest blog post on this subject and all things to help you to be a better leader, to build a world-class culture, and become the person that everyone will admire. Have a fantastic day.